Please sing the Sopa song from Kurapahas by loudly chanting Haribol 3 times. Haribol, Haribol, Haribol. Today's topic is 3 lives of Bharat Maharaj from the Srimad Bhagavatam. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
I think a good place for me to start is to find out who's new. New. Okay, that's a good number. Okay. Where do I start?
New to ISKCON or new to?
No, new, whatever. New. So a little background. I know something that everybody knows. The word avatar. Does anybody here not know what the word avatar is? It's this big movie, right? So avatar means in Sanskrit, one who descends. One who descends from where? One who descends from the spiritual realm to this realm. That's the meaning of avatar. And one of the avatars of Vishnu is Lord Ṛṣabhadeva. His life is discussed in Canto 5 of Srimad Bhagavatam. What's Srimad Bhagavatam? Srimad Bhagavatam is the graduate study. I'm looking around the room and seeing bright people, probably grad students, some of you, or have been already out on the other side of grad school. This is the graduate study of Bhagavad Gita. Everything that's there in Bhagavad Gita is then expanded at the graduate level, Srimad Bhagavatam. And Ṛṣabhadeva, in this painting, he's the king in the center of the painting. And in the foreground of the painting is his eldest son, Bharat. Bharat became the next king after Ṛṣabhadeva was king. And Ṛṣabhadeva is one of the avatars of Vishnu. And we're going to hear a little bit more about, what are some of the things, what are some of the features of the avatars, specifically Ṛṣabhadeva. His name, Ṛṣabha, means he's the best. And Deva means, godly, Ṛṣabhadeva. Supremely virtuous and famous as Ṛṣabhadeva. So one of the things he's famous for is giving teachings, like systematic teachings. And one of those sections in Srimad Bhagavatam is Canto 5, Chapter 5, where this is a painting to illustrate what he's doing. In this big assembly in his palace, he is speaking not only to his 100 sons. The eldest of them was Bharat. But as you see, there's ministers and there's brahmanas and there's all kinds of other people. He doesn't have a loudspeaker system. He didn't have Sanjaya yet to help him set it up. But apparently he had a strong voice and people could hear him. And he gave very elevated teachings. And some years ago, I remember very clearly, in one of the schools in Vrindavan, one of the schools, every morning the boys would line up in the top of their lungs, recite from memory the teachings of Ṛṣabhadeva. So they're very important and they're very potent. And that's one of the main contributions in this incarnation. There's some other features. This text is taken from a writing of Rupa Goswami. The newer people don't need to know who he is. He's just a very learned person in our line of acharyas. And one of his books was about the avatars. And in the avatars, he does many, many, many things. But one of those things he does is he's describing the different categories. This is just a cut and paste from that book. Ṛṣabhadeva avatars are seen to be of two kinds. Ṛṣabhadeva, you see in red letters, that's one of them. The first kind is briefly manifest and not very famous. Among them are Mohini, Anksa, and yoga avatars beginning with Shukla. So I don't need to go into what all that means for the new people because it's not essential. But if you want, I can later. You can ask me, what does this mean? What does that mean? I just want to focus on Ṛṣabhadeva. So Ṛṣabhadeva is described here, the second kind. He's authors of scriptures. Generally, they're great sages. Now, Ṛṣabhadeva wasn't a great sage. He was a king. But otherwise, they're great sages. Dhanvantari is the first name. Some of you may know about Ayurveda. Some of you may not know about Ayurveda, but it's the portion of the Vedas that teaches medicine or healing. And Dhanvantari is the avatar that presented that, the Ayurveda. Ṛṣabhadeva presented a variety of teachings, specifically about the soul and how to live a life that's very focused on the soul and the soul's connection with the Supreme, so yoga. He taught bhakti very nicely. Vyasadeva, that other next name, he's the one that wrote the Vedas. He wrote that they were already present in sound, and he put them in written form. He divided them and wrote, put them in written form because in this age of Kali, the picture of time from the Vedic description of things, time moves in cycles. And one of those cycles is different ages of mankind. There's a big cycle. There's bigger ones and there's smaller ones, but time moves in cycles. And in the present age, people have short memory. And so he wrote them down because people couldn't remember just from hearing, which was the process previously. Dattatreya is also mentioned. He's an incarnation or an avatar. He was the son of Anasuya and Atri. There's details and details, but he also taught. He did. I don't know of writings, but he gave teachings. And these are just names. If you can't follow all of this, don't worry. It's just an indication of categories of avatars on this Prabhava avatar category. Kapila gave teachings on Sankhya. Modern scientists, they like Sankhya. With one exception, they don't like the God part is part of Sankhya. They like the atheistic Sankhya. They like it. And it's very, very detailed, very precise. And there's a theistic and there's an atheistic Sankhya. They like the atheistic one. And Kapila didn't teach the atheistic one. He taught Sankhya that leads to meditation, that leads to realization of the Lord of the heart, that leads then in conclusion to a life of pure devotion. That was Kapila's teaching. And that's also in Srimad Bhagavatam. Teaching. And then section 3. But we're now speaking about Ṛṣabhadeva. After he instructed his sons, he turned the kingdom over to Bharata and several of his brothers. But 100 sons, that's a lot of sons. So what do you do with all those sons? Interesting. A large number of those sons became Brahmanas, although they're sons of the king, because their quality was not the quality of a ruler, the quality was intellectuals. They became Brahmanas. And 9 of them went beyond the scope of Varnashram system. They became like Narada Muni. Who's Narada Muni? Narada Muni is a great sage that is not within any material classification. So these 9 sons of Ṛṣabhadeva We find them appearing much later in the Srimad Bhagavatam in the 11th canto, and they give very detailed teachings to a king. So the point here is an important point. Often the sons of someone being trained by their father become like their father in terms of their quality and their occupation. But this is a prominent example where one king had sons, some of whom became kings, some of whom became intellectuals or brahmanas, and some of them went beyond any system. So in other words, third time. One's function in society has everything to do with quality and work, not birth. Because there's a mistaken idea that everything is determined by birth. But that's not the Vedic system. So after, I'll just read this. The fair-complexioned Ṛṣabhadeva appeared to teach the duties of the renounced order. So after he left his duties as king, he became detached and more detached and more detached, and he was an extreme personality. He became, the Sanskrit word is an avaduta. He made no regard of the external world. He showed the path of perfection, which is followed by those who have fully controlled their senses and who are honored by all orders of life. So he lived a life of solitude, although previously he was the emperor, vast empire. And in his detachment, persons didn't understand him. And sometimes they would taunt him. Children would throw sticks and stones at him, say bad names. And, he was totally aloof. As described, he left this world on a mountain range, and the mountains burst into flames, and he left this world in that condition. That's his father. Now we're going to go to the son. In the life of the son, Ṛṣabhadeva's son named Bharata, it was a previous, I said there's cycles of time. Cycles of time means one of the cycles of time is yugas, Y-U-G-A, yuga. So there's short, medium, long, and the longest. So he was living during that longest period called Satya Yuga, and people live much longer. And then they live less, and then live less, and then there's this present age. And then it cycles around again. So he ruled for a long time, 1,000 times 10,000 years. That's a long lifetime. Not the present age, don't worry. And when that period was finished, he divided his kingdom amongst his sons. And like his forefathers, he went to the path of, particularly his father, the path of renunciation. He went to the forest, and he went specifically to a place in North India, Hardwar, along the Gandaki River. And there's a particular area that's celebrated for sages to go. So although he was a king, he was living his life like a sage, and he was worshiping Narayana. That's what the painting is showing. Narayana, but specifically, those of you from India, you know what Gayatri Mantra is. And Gayatri Mantra is worship of Surya Narayana. Now, in case you're not from India, what does that mean? It means that the presiding deity of the sun planet. Some people, this is for everybody, some people think that Gayatri Mantra, which is a root mantra in all the Vedas, Brahma Gayatri, some people think that it's worship of the sun because there's mention. And some people think it's not worship of the sun, it's worship of the impersonal feature of the Supreme. Some people like that one. And some people understand, Bharat Maharaj understood, it's the presiding deity of the sun planet Surya means sun, Surya Narayan, or another name is Hiranya Maya, Hiran Maya. But Lord Narayan, for newer people, what's that? Lord Narayan is the Supreme Lord who resides in the spiritual world in Vaikuntha planets. And that's who he was worshiping. Now, a manifestation of Narayana presides in the sun planet, and the sun god and the residents of the sun planet worship him. And that's what Bharat Maharaj was doing. And it's described in the 5th canto. He became a most exalted person. He lived a long time. All of his duties were done in the proper fashion, religious, swadharma, occupational duties, great personality, very magnanimous, etc. And he detached himself from those worldly duties, immersed himself, and reached almost the topmost stage. This is a detail for those of you who've been around for a while. There's 3 primary stages of bhakti: beginner, intermediate, advanced. Sadhana bhakti, bhava bhakti, prema bhakti. Beginning, intermediate, advanced. And he was at that stage that's just above perfection, just below perfection. It's called bhava bhakti. He was in ecstasy. He was doing external things like others might do, but he had attained a state of consciousness that was almost, but not yet matured in the stage of prema, or love of God. So while he's living by the side of this river, Gandaki River, celebrated place actually, something happened. The will of providence arranged that while he went in the morning to take his morning bath and sat by the side of the river to chant his morning Gayatri, he saw something on the other side of the river. What he saw on the other side of the river was a deer also drinking water from the river. And she was looking this way, drinking water, looking that way, fearful of danger. And all of a sudden, there was a loud lion, and she panicked. And there's a lesson. The lesson is women shouldn't be startled when they're pregnant because there could be a catastrophe. In her case, there was a miscarriage. And a baby fawn was born because she was so frightened and startled. And she jumped. And when she jumped, she fell in the river. The river was moving swiftly. The river carried her downstream and she died, washed up on the bank down the river. And the king, Bharat, saw all this. He's a king. His nature is he gives protection. That's what kings do, good kings do. And so he went on the other side of the river, rescued the baby fawn, and brought the fawn back to his ashram. And he started becoming the mother and father and caretaker of this little baby fawn. That's nothing wrong with that. That's nice. However, he became so absorbed in the deer that as time passed, his devotional activities started to sag. And they started to sag. And they started to sag. And he consciously withdrew his consciousness from his duties. This shows that there's verses and verses, and he would have conversation with the deer, say this and say, the deer didn't talk back, but he would just, shower affection upon this little baby deer or fawn. And there's a detail that's important to understand in the story of Bharat Maharaj, and that is he not only became distracted, but we had this little discussion. You can be doing things that are externally like nice, and internally your consciousness can be out to lunch. You know what I mean? You can be in the gutter or, somewhere else, up in the sky or, anywhere. The mind can be somewhere other than what you're doing. And bhakti requires what your body does and also what your mind does. But he kind of checked out on the mind platform because his mind was attached to the deer. So he continued, as you see in the painting. He was doing his fire yajna and other duties, but his consciousness was withdrawn from Narayana, and his consciousness instead was invested in the deer. That's not, there's nothing wrong with his looking after the little fawn. There is something wrong with his checking out in his consciousness aspect of his devotional activity. Here's a commentary from one of our great acharyas, Jiva Goswami, who writes, ordinary fruitive activities are not strong enough to create such an impediment that is fall down. That's what Bharat Maharaj did. He fell down from his path of devotional service. Therefore, this verse is mentioning fruitive activities must have been offenses performed in a previous birth. In this way, King Bharatas is like King Indradumna and other devotees that committed offenses. So if you're new and you don't know what's going on here, there's two things, sin and offense. Both are problematic. However, bhakti is powerful such that sin, the impact, the residual effect of sin is cleansed by bhakti. However, the more serious and more severe is offense because it doesn't go away so easily. More bhakti is still, it's like a stain that doesn't go away. Scrub it up and it doesn't go away. So this great Acharya Jiva Goswami is explaining that it doesn't say what he did, but previously he made some, not just a sin or a boo-boo, he made an offense. And this whole event of his falling down, not just the deer coming, but his choice to stop or withdraw his consciousness from his devotional activity was a conscious choice arising from some past offense. So watch out for offense. It's good to know what they are. It's not a class in what they are. This is Bharat's life. References here to another king, same thing happened. Without all the details, he made an offense to a great sage. It wasn't like explicit and deliberate and harsh, but it was an offense. And he ended up in a bad situation. He was an elevated king, very elevated, spiritually advanced person that ended up getting cursed by the sage to become an elephant. Gajendra. You know the Gajendra story? No? Well, he became a king of elephants, and he was in a difficult situation because a crocodile grabbed his leg when he was bathing in a river, the lake. Big battle, and then he remembered his previous life as a king, started offering prayers according to his previous life as a king, and Lord Vishnu came and saved him. They all lived happily ever after. We went to the spiritual world. So the point here is, this is when you think of in the future, if you hear about Bharat Maharaj, he's a classic example of someone who went really high, bhava bhakti, and fell. That's really high, due to offense. So here's further commentary. King Bharat's willful neglect of bhakti due to a past offense resulted in his over attachment to the deer. Thus, fall down. Having affection for a deer in distress is fine. Over attachment to the point where you neglect devotional life, that's not fine. And another Acharya comments similarly, a little different. Bharata's fall was arranged by the Lord for the purpose of increasing his longing for bhakti after taking birth as a deer. and a Brahmana. So what happened was, one evening, the deer didn't come back, wandered away, and he was obsessive. Oh dear, where's my, maybe I offended him, maybe he went away, please come back. Oh, so he couldn't, the deer didn't come back. So he went at night looking for the deer, and he went in the wrong direction. He fell off a cliff and crashed on the jagged rocks below. And as he was dying, he thought of a deer. And as he was thinking of the deer, he became a deer. There's a verse in Bhagavad Gita. Many of you know the verse. Yam yam vapi smaran bhavam chajatante kalevaram. Ante means at the end. Kalevara means for certain. Ante kalevara. Whatever the mind is fixed on, at the moment of death, the mind, the subtle body, will carry the soul to the next destination according to what the mind is fixed on. So whatever your attachments are, that's where you're going after this body. And it's even during this lifetime, where where your attachments are, that's where you're going. So thank you all for coming here. Because there has to be some thought in the mind saying, hey, let's go get some prasadam. Whatever invites you to come. So he became a deer in his next life. And he lived his life as it went, good fortune, because of his very elevated position. He was gifted by a super soul within the heart a remembrance of his life as a king and an exalted devotee. So he remembered all that. And so as a deer, he wandered back to the same area and he hung around with the sages that were in that ashram. And he took the prasadam, he heard their talks. He was, he naturally, very gentle, garnered their affection. They were kind to him. He was very happy to be in their company, but in the body of a deer, remembering, I'm not going to do this again. And he died in the body of a deer. And his next life, this is life number 3. So the king, the deer, then the son of a Brahmana. And the son of a Brahmana, he was not going to make the same mistake again. So he acted as if he was dull. And thus he was named Jada, which means dull. Jada Bharata. And his father, Brahmana, did his best to teach him, and he always did everything backwards, purposely. And, he tried and he tried and he tried and he tried. He was a good father, but the son was like, I'm not going to learn this, Dad. I don't want to have anything to do with this material world. Again, I only want my spiritual objectives of life. And so his father threw his hands up in the air and let him go some way. And as he went his own way, he was wandering around the village like a madman. As you see, he's not dressed in any clothes. The shopkeepers would treat him not nicely, and the dogs would growl at him. And so forth. This is a description. Even his brothers treated him badly, poking sticks at him, saying mean things. And he didn't respond. He didn't become angry when they were treating him badly. At one point in time, I'm going quickly. There's many more details I'm not reciting because the hands of the clock keep moving. I want to get to some other things. At one point in time, he was wandering around like a madman, and some persons who were worshippers of goddess Kali got the idea there's no such thing in scripture, but let's make a human sacrifice. So they prepared him with this and that and the other thing to make a human sacrifice. And they brought him before goddess Kali with their choppers ready to make a human sacrifice. And goddess Kali, as you see in the painting, she burst out of the deity and chopped them, screaming and saying, he's the devotee of my Lord. and they were finished. So he was protected, although he wasn't doing anything to protect himself. His mind was fixed on his goal, his objective, as he was even more so now because he had learned a nice lesson, but as a king. And now comes the conclusion, or the maybe interesting part. His body was stout and strong. And the next king after him, after Bharat Maharaj, his name was Rahugana. And Rahugana was nice, but he was a little proud. We all know what pride is. Pride is insidious. Pride is something to beware of, just like offense. Pride is something that can destroy everything, anything and everything good. And pride exists in the heart of everyone that has something. We all have something. It's rare. Humility is a nice characteristic, but sometimes people are very proud of how humble they are. Anybody like that? So beware of pride. And the king was an elevated person, Rahugana, but he was proud of his position of being king. And he had, as he went around here and there, he didn't have a Rolls Royce. It had a palanquin. And the palanquin had palanquin carriers, but they only had 3, and they needed a 4th one. And so they conscripted Jad Bharat because he was strong. They could just tell him what to do, they thought. And he could carry the palanquin. So he didn't complain. He was the king, but I'll carry the king's palanquin, no problem. So he's carrying the palanquin, but he saw ants on the path. So he was moving in such a way he wouldn't crush any of the ants on the path, which was fine for the ants, but wasn't fine for the king. The king was getting jostled, and the king, as you see, he leans over the palanquin and says harsh things. It was actually, the initial things, they were just sarcastic, but it was harsh. It was clear that he was just being cruel and harsh because he was proud. So they all went on, the other palanquin carriers, and it happened a second time. And when it happened the second time, he threatened him. It was really, unpleasant. His behavior and speech was not becoming of an elevated person. And so what happened next is Jad Bharat decided to speak. And there's no record. He spoke to his father. He wasn't silent with his father, but he just wasn't communicative of what was inside. He just kept it inside. But for some reason, my understanding is he saw within the king not just the pride, but he saw the jewel that was underneath the pride. And so he began instructing him. And he was very strong, but philosophical, but very strong. Here's a close-up of this, avoiding the ants. And here's one of the statements. Whoops. Your micro. Sorry about that. I'm going to recite something that Jad Bharat said to the king. Whoops. This person, the king, one thinks of as moving around on the earth, and who is a transformation of that earth, O earthly one. For what reason would your lordship, with these feet, and above them these ankles, calves, knees, thighs, waist, neck, shoulders, and upon those shoulders the wooden palanquin upon which the one sits, who is thus known as the king of Salvira, impose this haughty insistence of I, the king of Sindhu and thus be a captive of falsehood. So he has good vocabulary, and his philosophy is very high. And the king heard it, and he didn't like bark back at him. He understood this is not a dullard. I thought he was, but he's obviously not. And so he appealed to Jad Bharat for forgiveness. I didn't understand who you were, and I've been a fool, thinking proud thoughts. And in addition to appealing to you to accept my apology, I didn't really understand all of what you said. Could you say it again? That's not literally what he said, but in essence, that's what he said. And so then came round 2, and he went up higher. And Rahugana understood more when he said it round 2. And then there's some exchange between them after Jad Bharat speaks the second time. There's a number of nice images. You see on the ground, there's the little string of ants. That was the cause of the problem for the king. And he then speaks further to Rahugana, third time around. And he speaks this third time around in the allegory. He speaks of a man that's in a forest and is lost. That's called material life. The forest of material life. This is another painting of the same. And he's depicting the king as this person that's lost and seeing these things and experiencing these things and being bitten by gnats and so forth and so on and so on. And lost. And Jad Bharat is lifting the king out of this darkness of illusion, and the king gets it. The king gets it. He realized his spiritual position. This is the third life of Bharat Maharaj as Jad Bharat. And he then became very spiritually elevated. That's what's shown on the upper portion of this painting. He's getting this realization of his spiritual identity, or at least his spiritual position as a servant of Lord Narayana, who Bharat Maharaj was worshipping. So the king should also be worshipping. And he became persuaded. I got lost in pride, and therefore became very, very proud and made this big offense to you. Please forgive my offense. I want to go forward with this. Here's a section, in the last section, it starts in Canto 5, Chapter 5, and it goes through Chapter 13. So if you like reading Srimad Bhagavatam, that's where that section comes from. And here's a direct verse from Srimad Bhagavatam. There were some waves of dissatisfaction in the mind of Jad Bharat due to being insulted by King Rahugana, who made him carry his palanquin. But Jad Bharat neglected this, and his heart again became calm and quiet like an ocean. We discussed this afternoon. A gathering of guests came to Paramarupa's home. So, ballast. I asked people in the audience, do you know what ballast is? You know what ballast is. Okay. When you have a ship and it's at sea, when it gets stormy, it rocks a lot. So one of the things they do for big ships, especially, they put some weight at the bottom called ballast. So it won't tip as much. The ballast helps keep the ship stable. Sometimes they have a big thing that goes way down in the water just to keep the ship from rocking too much. Ballast. Spiritual consciousness is ballast because in life, there's always something. Even you're a very advanced person, like Jad Bharat, very advanced person. He was detached like anything. Yet, some waves of dissatisfaction in the mind arose when the words that were spoken by the king were insulting. And he felt it. His mind experienced some waves of dissatisfaction. But the ballast centered him very quickly, because he was actually, as I'll read on. Although King Rahugana had insulted him, he, that's Jad Bharat, was a great Paramahamsa. What is Paramahamsa mean? Paramahamsa means that Parama is supreme, and Hamsa means swan. Yeah. So he is a swan-like transcendentalist, topmost stage of transcendentalist, Paramahamsa. So he was that caliber of person that his ballast centered him very quickly. His spiritual awareness of himself and his relationship with the Supreme was the ballast. His heart was fixed. His conception of himself was fixed. His mind was disturbed. Waves of dissatisfaction occurred in the mind, as will happen. But he was very quickly settled again. Being a Vaishnava, he was naturally very kind-hearted, and he therefore told the king about the constitutional position of the soul. He then forgot the insult because King Rahugana pitifully begged pardon at his lotus feet. And after this, he began to wander all over the earth, just as before. So he resumed his activities in this Jad Bharat stage. It's described because he was so fixed in that was his last life, he went directly to the spiritual realm. 3 lives of Bharat Maharaj ends a nice story, nice conclusion. There's a similar message, and I'm going to end with this. So when you hear I'm going to end, that means you have questions, get ready. There's a passage in the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam where Krishna is speaking to Uddhava. So who's Uddhava? Some of you, most of you, maybe, is anybody here that doesn't know what is Bhagavad Gita? Anybody doesn't know what is Bhagavad Gita? Bhagavad Gita is Krishna speaking to Arjuna. Arjuna is Krishna's cousin. Cousin means Arjuna's mother and Krishna's father were brother and sister. Arjuna's mother was Kunti, Krishna's father was Vasudeva, and they were brother and sister, so they're cousins. But Vasudeva had other brothers and sisters, and one of those brothers was Devabhaga, and Devabhaga had a son whose name was Uddhava. So Uddhava is Krishna's cousin, just like Arjuna. So in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is speaking to Arjuna, and in this 11th canto, Krishna is speaking to Uddhava. And it's the graduate study, as Bhagavad Gita is the undergraduate, Bhagavatam is the graduate study. It's not like, it's too far out, you can't understand it. It just builds on the fundamentals that are there in Bhagavad Gita. So in one section, Uddhava asks similarly about, how to handle, sometimes it happens, people say insulting things or do harsh things that are mean. Sometimes. When once upon a time I was a college kid. And as a college kid, I had a big problem with what I call man's inhumanity to man. It was an existential dilemma. It was like a big deal. I didn't go nuts, but I was very troubled. People want to be treated kindly. Why do they treat each other otherwise? And it's not just sometimes, it's like all over the place. So why is that? I pondered and pondered and pondered. No answers. I went to my elder brother Didn't have an answer. He sent me to the priest. The priest said he needs a psychiatrist. I said, thanks a lot. Wasn't like, jumping off a cliff or something. It was just, wow. So Uddhava asked that question. He didn't get, a runaround. Krishna, here's what Krishna said in response to his question. There is virtually no saintly man in this world capable of resettling his own mind after it has been disturbed by the insulting words of an uncivilized man. Sharp arrows which pierce one's chest and reach the heart do not cause as much suffering as the arrows of harsh, insulting words that become lodged within the heart when spoken by uncivilized men. So that's the principle. And then Krishna goes on for a whole chapter describing the Avanti Brahmana. Avanti is the place where Krishna went to school. He studied under Sandipani, for those of you who've been around a while. He studied under Sandipani Muni. Sandipani Muni's ashram was in Avantipur. So there was a Brahmana in Avanti who, his whole story is told, and I could tell a story. But the story is meant to help us understand. The reason Krishna is saying it is he became disturbed and then sought the solution. That's a nice story. I'll let you read the story. The Avanti Brahmana narration is an historical account related by Lord Krishna to Uddhava, which teaches how to tolerate the insults of others. Okay. I'm looking at the clock and I think I did it. I didn't know if I was speaking quickly because I have a tendency to talk too much. And there's any time for questions. So I did it. There's 11 minutes. See if there's some discussion. There's a lot of people here. This is nice. Comments or questions from anybody? I can summarize again if that helps. Main points. There's a question way in the back.
I need a microphone.
No, but for people remote, they may want to hear you.
Hare Krishna, thank you for the wonderful class. I just have two questions, particularly just around the sort of the detail around the deer. So what benefit is this? What benefit is there of following the path of Krishna consciousness if one of the topmost devotees, who's essentially a prema, can sort of be haunted by his offenses?
Well, the lesson is that your question specifically, what about the rest of us? That's your question, kind of?
Yeah, it's almost like, it's not what's the point, but then what chance do I have?
Okay, what about the rest of us? The message is beware of offense. We don't know what that offense was. I don't know anywhere where it said what the offense was. But it wasn't just like he slipped on a banana peel or something. It was something serious. And the something serious had a consequence. So the hope for us is we avoid making offense. So it's good to know what offense is. And it's good to avoid it. So one of the things that will help you and me understand what offense is that there's a literature written by Rupa Goswami that Prabhupada has made available for us in English, Nectar of Devotion. It lists offenses to be avoided. Some of them are common sense. Supposing I slap you in the face, that's not nice. That's not just sin, that's offense. So, it doesn't have to be that severe, but it can, depending on the severity of the offense, there's a consequence. And it doesn't go away easily. So what's the hope for you and me is we come to know what offense is. Some of it's common sense, but we should know what they are and then avoid them. I'll give you an example. You ready?
Yeah.
Before coming to Boston, I was in Texas. You got a British accent, Texas. So I visited in Dallas, Texas. And after the evening class, people came, and then the Pujari came, leaned over and said, if you like, I can take you on the altar. This is a signal that we want to keep moving forward because there are people coming in at the end. So, but I'll just keep eye contact with you. Okay. So the Pujari came to me, leaned over and said, if you like, I can bring you on the altar and you can put your head on the feet of the deity. And I said, I'm not clean. But next time when I come, I'll be clean so that I can do that. Because it's an offense. And as much as, it's like a dream come true, I'm not going to make an offense to have a dream come true and then have a reaction for that offense. Because I know what the offense is. I know that it is an offense to touch the deity in an unclean state, for example. So if I were to do that, I'd have a stain that doesn't easily go away. I don't want to offend, nor do I want the reaction to an offense. Both. And it's more severe, the lesson is, for you and me, it's more severe than sin, depending upon the type of offense that's done. So that's the whole. And the good news is, through bhakti, gradually that offense, that stain can be also removed. But we have to be, you and I, and every one of us have to be very focused on our mission in life and, work towards that goal. As somebody else that's doing something else. Somebody wants to be whatever they want to be. You want to be a good musician. Or like Sanjay here was here early setting up the sound system. He knows a lot about sound systems. He's invested a lot in learning about sound systems and et cetera, et cetera. There's sacrifice to get something. So that's a sacrifice that's permanent. So you and I, let's work on that one. Do the things that are favorable and be cautious about the things that are very detrimental. Your second question?
Just still with the idea is, let's just say I'm a Pujari and I eventually get married, so on and so forth, which basically means I'm looking after the Lord full time, the deities. And then there comes a point where I want to raise a family. So now where do I draw the line again to sort of devoting my entire life to my children? Because psychologists say, for example, you have like a certain period of time, like the first 5 years are most sort of crucial for a child. But now I'm not going to sort of focus on.
Oh, it's an easy answer. Don't accept responsibility for a child unless you're prepared to fulfill that responsibility. Doesn't mean you can't be a Pujari, but you can't be a full-time Pujari, most likely.
So I think, so my question is then, sorry, maybe just to clarify, is that, because essentially that devotion in terms of my service will not go to my child. So now how do I separate the two?
You don't separate them. You teach your child how to be a quality devotee, let's say high quality devotee, by your devotion to the deity. You set the example. Not, they're off in the corner or neglected. They see you. They feel it. And that's part of parenting, part of it passing on to your dependents. The mood and the vitality of bhakti. You show by example, without neglecting. It's just part of what you do. You may not be like a brahmachari that's all they do, because they haven't accepted that responsibility. Anything else? I hear a bell ringing. That means someone's signaling me. I have to. Comments, questions? Yes.
Maharaj, you were saying about that it's very difficult to tolerate the insults and it's easier to tolerate the heart pierced with an arrow. So I was looking at some examples from Bhagavatam where it was not even an insult, but more than that, like Prahlad Maharaj being, he being killed, and Dhruva Maharaj, and so many others, so much big trauma, like life of Queen Kunti and Pandava. So how did they overcome? Not just insult, but traumas on them coming again and again.
It's, each have their own autobiography. The essential is feeling protection. In the case of the Avanti Brahmana, he was miserly. He didn't have full or proper shelter. Prahlad Maharaj did. And because that we're using that term ballast, he had all that ballast, so it didn't touch him. The Avanti Brahmana, it did. And so, and others, so it depends on the circumstance. And let's go back with the life of Bharat, Judd Bharat. He was taunted. They were going to make a human sacrifice. So, he was able to withstand torment and say nothing and not be disturbed. In this case, he was disturbed. And so it depends. Part of the benefit of his becoming disturbed was us to hear about it in Srimad Bhagavatam and how it can happen to a well-meaning person. But what he spoke shows, the elevated position he was in. You read those sections and they're really amazing. So a lot has to do with our relationship with Super Soul or the personality of Godhead, how we're going to respond to difficult situations. Not a clear, crisp answer. I'm just saying it's customized in our relationship with Krishna. It's going to be a little bit different. And here, Krishna is speaking to Uddhava on a particular point. Doesn't mean there aren't other points that Prahlad is an exception to, for example. Sanjaya, and then we're going to end.
In the spiritual world.
In the spiritual world, going to the spiritual world, everybody.
In the spiritual world, because now Uddhava and Krishna talking and Arjuna, do talks like this take place in spiritual world between Krishna and his?
I don't know. I'll send a text message to see what he's. No, they're not subject to these kinds of things. They're subject to other kinds of things, but not these kinds of things. This is specific to draw us, purposeful, to draw us from absorption in matter, dutiya abhinivesh, absorption in matter, to absorption in Krishna. So in the spiritual world, there's absorption in Krishna. There's no relieving person from absorption in matter in the spiritual world. There's certainly discussions. Okay, I'm going to end because it's time to end. Thank you very much.
Jai.